From the studios of Blackwater Media in the city of Atlanta, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Dr. William Lester Show. And I have had an absolutely wonderful time doing this show and starting to get some feedback coming from some folks primarily off of YouTube listening to the show and have expressed their enjoyment. And so thank you to those people, and welcome to new folks who haven't heard the show before. Of course, this is a show all about the cool vintage lifestyle. And on the last couple of shows, I have gotten into some discussion of television and movies. We talked about Kolchak, The Night Stalker, and we went in depth with that show, and we had a conversation about a horror film called Death Moon. And so I thought about a number of things to talk about tonight, but I realized that, we're cutting deeply into September now, and October, of course, is coming, and I spoke in an earlier show about my cool vintage horror film festival, Halloween Film Festival, that I have annually. And so I thought, well, why not keep it going? Why not bring another film to the show? Another favorite that I have enjoyed down through the years. As a matter of fact, the film that I am going to talk about tonight, I referenced in the previous show when we discussed Death Moon. If you recall, I had mentioned that I had watched a movie that started about midnight. And also keep in mind, this is going back, I remember I must have been 12. I'd watched this film, and the Death Moon film came on after the first film. Well, that's the film I want to talk about tonight. The film was called The Curse of the Werewolf, and it was produced by Hammer, which was the British film studio, which really, in my view, took over the mantle of the horror film from Universal. And this film comes to us from 1961, and I think 1961 was right at the point where Hammer started getting its legs, and it really started producing the kind of horror films that would become a signature. Okay? The gothic horror, in just remarkable color. When you look at a Hammer film, if you're familiar with Hammer, when you see a Hammer film, you recognize it immediately just from the camera angles, just from the look of the film. The movie is based on a novel called The Werewolf of Paris, of course by Guy Endore, book published in 1933. And strangely, when this film begins, you find that it's set in Spain, 18th century Spain. And I believe that had something to do with the availability of sets as the movie went into production. And there was a set that was historically appropriate, but it was Spanish. And so they just set the story in Spain. Now, before I go any further into details about the film, I'm going to go ahead and reach for my pipe, and I will tell you that we're going to enjoy one of the tobaccos produced by Brigadier Black, which is a company that produces a fantastic assortment of pipe tobaccos, really wonderfully aromatic, flavorful pipe tobaccos at a fantastic price. We're talking about a large size tin. I actually don't know how many ounces, but it's a very large tin for, I think, $16, $17, something like that. But they produce a nice variety. The one we'll be smoking tonight is called ALAMO, and each of the different types has been named for some famous battle in history or some notable military event. I mean, there's one called Antietam, there's one called Waterloo, there's one called Sherman's March, okay, and of course there is one called Gettysburg. Well, tonight we will be smoking the ALAMO, so I'm going to go ahead and take my diamond match and get it started. As the wonderfully aromatic smoke wafts up into the air. It's wonderful. Tonight, that is being paired with a very basic little concoction. It's really not even a concoction. This is just a little sipping whiskey. Something called Early Times, which I referenced in a previous show. A really nice old school brand, and I've just poured it over a little ice, and it'll be a wonderful companion to this ALAMO. So, The Curse of the Werewolf, 1961, Hammer Films. The cast includes Oliver Reed, and I'm not sure, I think this may be his film debut, I'm not sure. We'll have to go back and double check, but it's very early on in his career. Clifford Evans, Yvonne Romaine, Catherine Feller, Anthony Dawson, and the legendary Michael Ripper, which is a fixture in Hammer Films. Hammer fans know the name Michael Ripper. Instantly recognizable, fantastic character actor. And when you're watching a Hammer film and Michael Ripper comes into a scene, you just kind of settle back into your chair because you know it's going to be fantastic. So let's go through this a little bit. As I said, it does start off in the 18th century in Spain, and the way it unfolds begins with a beggar, a wandering beggar, wandering the countryside, thin, emaciated, and you can look at this man, you can tell he hasn't had very much to eat, and he wanders into this town. I think they call it Santa Vera, I think it's, but he wanders into this town, and he hears the bells of the town square ringing, and he's wondering what's going on, and he finds out that the mayor, or whatever the nobleman who rules over that area, he's having a wedding party, and the beggar goes up to the castle to ask for food, ask for water, and when he gets there, he discovers that the nobleman is just a nasty, rude, crude individual, and he immediately starts making fun of this beggar, very sarcastic, and he offers him a small morsel of food, and he tosses it to him almost as if you would toss some table scraps to a dog. And he makes the beggar dance for his food, sing for his supper, so to speak. And it's very dehumanizing, in the scene, and you just feel sorry for this beggar. And anyway, this kind of goes around and around, and at some point the party starts winding down, and the nobleman rises with his bride and tells everyone good night, and the beggar very innocently says, "Have a good night, my lord," or something like that. And this nobleman is offended by this and has the beggar tossed into the dungeon below. And then there are a number of scenes where obviously the beggar is in prison down there, and he's basically neglected. And every now and then a few scraps of food are taken to him by the jailer and the jailer's daughter. So again, the beggar is neglected, and he's down there, and he's just almost living like an animal, a caged animal. A number of years go by, and the jailer dies, and the jailer's daughter, of course, she grows up to be the amazingly attractive character played by Yvonne Romaine. Now, I don't think that the character is ever named in the film. Eventually, the nobleman turns his attention to this obviously attractive servant girl. And by this time, he's an old curmudgeon. He's an ugly old mean-spirited troll. And no one wants to be around him. In fact, the only reason why people are around him is because he's a nobleman and he orders people around. He has servants and what have you. And he basically forces his attentions on her, and she rebuffs him, of course, because he's just about as unappealing as you could imagine. And he has her tossed into the dungeon. And when this happens, you can almost, it's not that you can tell what's going to happen, but I mean, you can just feel that, oh, this is not going to be good. And I won't, get into too many details here, but the beggar, by this time an old man, imprisoned old man, is almost reduced to an animal, and he's barely human in mind, body, or spirit. And he accosts her because they're in the cell together. And in the aftermath, he's lying dead on the floor of the cell. And she's lying on the floor of the cell, obviously having been abused despicably. She tells the guards that she will capitulate to the wishes of the nobleman. And again, I won't give this little part away because I really want you guys to see the film. But she's able to escape the castle by being clever and using her wits, because now it's a matter of survival. She's found in the woods, really more dead than alive, just kind of hanging on, and she's brought into the house of the character Senor Don Colido, which is played by Clifford Evans, who is another face that you will see in a number of Hammer films. And he lives there with, the kindly old housekeeper. And they try to nurse this girl back to health. And at some point in her recovery, they discover that she is going to have a baby. And of course, things kind of go along, and she has the baby. And as a component of the storyline, the baby's born on December 25th. And there's a issue about that raised in the film about being born on Christmas Day, which is apparently an element of a lot of folklore. And there are a number of events, starting with the birth of the child, who they name Leon, going into his boyhood, where things become very strange. Things become very strange. And there's some elements that I'm going to leave out here because I want to leave little gaps in here so that when you see the film, you know, I won't have explained every minute element of it to you. But by the time he is a little boy, they realize that there's something going on, and it's got something to do with not just the day that he was born, but it has something to do with his mother and the situation that she was in before she was able to escape that castle. So, in a nutshell, this boy is cursed. He's cursed. A number of local goat herders realize that something has been coming in at night and killing their goats. And they notice, well, the goats have their throats torn out. And as experienced herders, as experienced outdoorsmen, they recognize that this is the work of a wolf. And so there's a whole melee about, well, you know, there's a bloodthirsty wolf killing our goats. What's going on? And one night there is another attack, and the hunter fires, and he believes he hits the wolf, and he follows through the brush, and he sees the trail of blood. And so to some level, you know, he was successful. And there's some things that come after that, you know, like I said, I don't like to play spoiler. So we get to the point where Leon is growing up, and he grows up. And the adult Leon is, of course, played by Oliver Reed. And he's leaving home. He's setting out to find his place in society, to make his mark on the world. And he ends up in this little village. I think this is a great place to do a pipe relight. So let's go back to our diamond matches. And that wonderful blue smoke rising in the air. And let's reach, of course, for our tumbler of early times. It's sensational. So he ends up in this little village, and he is offered a job working in a vineyard. He's offered a job working in a vineyard. And he's working with another guy who looks maybe to be about the same age. You know, they may be in their early 20s. And that character's name is Jose. And it's a vineyard, and it's owned by a wealthy wine merchant. And they're bottling the wine and applying labels on the bottles and everything that goes into that. And he meets and falls in love with a girl named Christina, who's also the daughter of the man that he's working for. So you can see there's going to be some social dynamic, because the father is obviously wealthy, and you know, the idea that his daughter would be consorting with a boy working in his vineyards or putting labels on the wine bottles, is just, you could imagine. And of course, when night falls and the moon rises, the death toll begins. And I can tell you, watching this as a 12-year-old, I mean, it was absolutely terrifying. The way, in this film, the way that the attack scenes are structured kind of maximizes the intensity and the suspense. The way that this werewolf lurks and stalks its prey. It's fantastic. And you're a long time into the film before you even see its face, which I think is a great part of the film. I mean, you kind of see it in the shadows, you kind of see it in silhouette, you kind of see it lurking in the dark, leaping and crouching on rooftops. But it's very horrific. And it's snarling and growling. There is a scene in the film which Leon is in a room with a young lady that he's met in a restaurant, bar, casino type place where there's loud music and gambling and dancing, and it's a raucous place. And when you watch the film, and she's doing everything she can to kind of seduce him, and I won't give it away, but what ends up happening to her is just shocking. And needless to say, she meets a very unfortunate end. And again, the werewolf is it's on the prowl, it's on the hunt. It's out to make as many kills in one night as it can. And of course, by this time, I mean, you know, as a movie watcher, you know what's going on now. You know what's going on. Now, backtracking just a little bit, because, you know, in my hesitation to give too much away, I've left some things out that maybe I can tell you. But there is a priest in the film, and this priest has known of Leon since he was born. He baptized him. He's kind of counseled his adoptive father, and he knows exactly what's going on. He knows exactly what's happened to the boy, now a man. He knows, and he explains to the adoptive father, you know, this curse, this terrible curse, this werewolf, this lycanthropy, and he says, you know, maybe the boy can be saved, but this is a terrible thing, this evil force. And so the priest kind of injects an element of hope in the midst of the horror, and the murders continue. Eventually, even Leon's co-worker, Jose, falls victim to the savagery of the werewolf. Now, the girl Christina, the daughter of the nobleman who he's worked for, the girl falls in love with Leon. And so there's the love story, the forbidden love story angle here. Not only is he a poor boy, but he's cursed. And the love of this girl is probably the best thing that's ever happened to him. And he comes to believe that the love that she has for him, or the love that they have for each other, will save him, or maybe can purge this curse. He is arrested by the police because when some of the murders occur, he cannot alibi for his whereabouts. So it's that old police thing that never changes, right? Motive and opportunity. And of course, he is so gripped with fear and self-loathing and guilt and every other negative emotion that he basically says, listen, I'm a monster. I'm a werewolf. I change into a terrible creature. And of course, initially it's like, you know, yeah, whatever. You did the murder, so you're going to stand trial. And he says, yes, I did it, but I did it as a werewolf. And of course, people say, well, okay, you're locked up now. And he basically tells them, no. When the change comes over me, this cell will not hold me. And if I get out, and I will kill again, and it will be on your hands. And because they don't really believe him, of course, he stays locked up. And it's so ironic because he's locked in a cell with the character that's played by Michael Ripper, who I referenced earlier, who is just the omnipresent figure in Hammer films. And Michael Ripper is playing a character in the credits that's listed as the Old Soak, which is just a kind British gentlemanly way of saying the town drunk. And the moon rises, and Leon goes into his transformation. And it's played out very, very well, very, very dramatically. And you've really got to see it because the music that starts when he goes into the transformation are these really powerful pounding drums. And he lets out a wail. When he first realizes, when he first turns around and looks out and sees the moon, he lets out a wail that will go all the way up and down your spine 100 times. And he goes into the transformation in the cell. And you can see, and for the first time in the film, you see what starts happening to his hands, and more horrifically, his face. And remember now, Oliver Reed at this time was a big, strong, young guy. And so he was physically imposing. I mean, he looked powerful. And so when he was going through all of these gyrations and raging through this metamorphosis, it was terrifying because you could just imagine the power that this creature has. And eventually, he just takes the door right off the cell. But previously he told them, this cell will not hold me. And now he's free. And I'm telling you, when you watch the film, he rips the door right off of this cell. And he goes out into the night. And now by this time, there's crowds and mobs gathered. And you kind of see the traditional, the idea, the old cliche about the villagers with torches and pitchforks. There's totally that scene there. And he takes to the rooftops because, of course, he's stronger and faster and more agile. So he takes to the rooftops. And the people below are following and trying to see if they can trap him and corner him. And the going from rooftop to rooftop along there's railings and stairs and ledges and overhangs and all of this. And actually, Oliver Reed is doing all of these stunt. It's not a stunt man. So it must have been, even for a young guy in his early 20s, it must have been physically daunting when you watch this scene. And I'm quite surprised that he didn't injure himself, which to my knowledge, he was not hurt. And eventually he comes to a church and he climbs all the way up, and he's in the bell tower of the church, all the way up there. It's very high. And they start ringing the bell, and obviously it's so loud, and you imagine that the werewolf has very sensitive ears, and you can just tell that the loud tone is just driving him crazy, and he's just raging and snarling. And you see him at his full fury, this evil, powerful, predatory monster, who of course is the cursed Leon Colido, a poor boy from the most humble beginnings imaginable. Of course, I won't tell you how it ends, because a lot of the pleasure will be in getting excited and seeing it for yourself. Now, this is one that's out there on DVD and or Blu-ray. So you're not going to have very much trouble at all tracking this one down. And absolutely recommend. This is absolute stamp of approval on the cool vintage lifestyle movie watching, particularly for your Halloween film festival. Pick this one up. The Curse of the Werewolf. Again, here's the cast. Oliver Reed, Clifford Evans, Yvonne Romaine, Catherine Feller, Anthony Dawson, and the omnipresent Michael Ripper. And if you've seen it, you're just kind of nodding your head. If you haven't seen it, you're in for a real treat. Now, the werewolf makeup in this film is remarkable. And it's remarkable on a couple of levels. It's remarkable just on its own merits. I mean, it really works. And he looks really ferocious. And it's almost fashioned. It makes me think that the designers and the makeup people had the idea of a timber wolf, a gray timber wolf. The other remarkable thing to me is they chose not to rip off Jack Pierce's creation of Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman depiction from Universal. Because that had been the default template werewolf look. The cinematic werewolf look, of course, was established by Lon Chaney Jr. and legendary makeup artist Jack Pierce. A lot of filmmakers reduced themselves to ripping off that look, and of course it wasn't that, so it looked like, these other films, in many cases look like cheap imitations of Lon Chaney Jr. Well, Hammer didn't do that. Hammer did not do that. They created a unique look, a frightening look, and frankly, a look that became somewhat iconic. It was somewhat iconic. I don't think any werewolf, any movie werewolf, even to this day, is as iconic as the look achieved with Lon Chaney Jr. But this rendition, played by Oliver Reed, did achieve some iconic status. It was featured on many magazine covers in the 60s and into the 70s. Famous Monsters of Filmland, other fantasy magazines. That image was on many of those magazine covers. So it's absolutely cool. It's absolutely vintage. And it is a worthy addition to our Halloween Film Festival repertoire. So I hope that you go out and find that movie, track it down, because it's getting time to plan, how you're going to screen the films. Will you have friends over? Will it just be something you do personally, or however whatever works for you? I want to remind you guys about the different ways that you can listen to the show. Obviously, we have our Blackwater Media YouTube channel, which I think that's where most people who are listening end up going. But on my personal Facebook page, William Lester, and on the show page, the William Lester Show Facebook page, it's there. And again, if you want, it is downloadable. You can also hear it on Google Plus. But it is downloadable as an MP3 file, and it all kind of depends on what you're using to listen, with. If it's a laptop, you have to do one thing. If it's a Android phone or an iPhone or an iPad or a Kindle, each of these devices have a methodology for downloading MP3 files. You save it on your cloud. Build your own archive. So I want to thank you guys. Again, it's The Curse of the Werewolf Hammer Films, 1961. It's a winner. So, we'll stop it there. And thank you guys for listening. And I look forward to seeing you again. It's always cool. It's always vintage. See you next time.